Morning.
Morning.
Psalm 139. O Lord, you
Okay.
have searched me and you know me. It says, you search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. And this amazing, wonderful knowledge of God that He's acquainted before all my ways, He's expressing a lot of gratitude and praise
Hmm.
about how even before a word is on my tongue, you know it.
Yeah, so it's like he's talking about discernment of thoughts and God's knowledge, his really amazing, lofty knowledge. I don't know how you feel about that. He says, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is wonderful. Um, but there seems to be kind of an ambivalence too, like, and that's really true to life. In this psalm, if you actually kind of like try to figure out where God, where the psalmist talks about it in a lofty way and where it's sort of ambivalent, it's interesting. Like you hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. Is that a positive thing? I don't know. Hemming is where you put a piece of cloth and then you sort of put like, I guess you stitch it. So you're hemming.
Mm-hmm.
So you're hemming me in behind. So then you're like, oh, I can't go back. And before, sort of like, oh, I'm trapped, kind of. And you lay your hand upon me. It's like, oh, that picture is not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah,
Where,
so then the
yeah.
result, the instinctive feel is that you want to flee, and knowing that God knows us so well, I think that one response is that we do want to run away and escape, and it feels overbearing. So we want to hide and or distract ourselves, or just not think about this
Mm.
knowledge that God has of us.
Yeah, and it says, surely the darkness shall cover me. It's kind of going along with that. It's actually, it kind of flashback to Eden, wanting to cover ourselves, to be hidden. So this is actually pretty, at this point in verse 11, it seems to be pretty clear. Like, oh, he's saying to himself, surely the darkness shall cover me and the light about me be night. But, oh my gosh, even darkness is not dark to God. So we do have this ambivalent response to God's thorough knowledge of us, and he goes back and forth. The psalmist goes back and forth between that, and no wonder it's really true to life, right? Now I don't exactly know how he resolves this. I don't know if we can actually kind of give you a step by step, or the psalm actually describes a step by step. But it's just being true to our emotion that it's an ambivalent thing,
But
you know.
the it's ambivalent, but the direction is upward. It's
Yeah,
to
it
greater
ends there.
awe and gratitude.
I think there's something about God's knowledge of David that he focuses on, of himself, right? He focuses in on that. That
Mm-hmm.
God's presence is so wide and so big in a sense. That's sort of the picture that there's no way he can go beyond it. He can't flee from it. No matter where he goes, he can't hide. But then he sort of focuses in on God's knowledge of him, of me. It goes beyond my understanding. I praise you. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Um, and frame is not hidden from you. So God's knowledge of me goes beyond even my knowledge of myself, right? When I was being knit together in my mother's womb, my frame was not hidden from you. So that means, well, obviously I don't remember it, but God knows it. God knows about that. So God knew me longer than I knew myself, and God's knowledge of me is deeper and wider than my own knowledge of myself. So that seems to be the theme here. And
So he comes
to
to see how precious God's thoughts are and vast. And what strikes me about this is that through the struggle, he gets to the point of valuing God's thoughts. He outward focused on your thoughts. I want more of your thoughts. And um, even though we may feel ambivalent, I think that that should be the pattern of our own thoughts. And I see many people, including myself many times, are so into my own thoughts and thinking that they're so fascinating. And we keep repeating our own thoughts about ourselves. And even the most insecure of us, I think we are pretty fascinated with ourselves and we think our own thoughts are so interesting. But the result of this is a downward spiral or a looping thinking. But instead, as we see in the psalmist here, he grows more and more enamored and in awe with God's thoughts and how vast they are, how deep. And so I need to remember
yeah,
um,
God's knowledge of God's knowledge of me, right? Like kind of going back to that whole thing, like God's knowledge of me is wider and deeper than myself. So then I need to kind of submit to God's knowledge of me instead of like really clinging on to my insistence of my own knowledge of myself. So
My own
yeah,
story.
yeah.
And so this kind of towards the end, he kind of starts to rant against his enemies.
A lot of
and
psalms sort of end that way. So it's
yeah,
like
it
whoa.
suddenly sounds violent, and we might think, oh, aren't they supposed to love my enemies? But I think this is also true to reality, that if we start seeing life from God's perspective and valuing God's ways and loving them, we see the offensiveness of those who hate God, who rise up against him, who take his name in vain, who are malicious against God. And
And ultimately, the biggest enemy is Satan, of course, right? And so we can interpret many times in Psalms when it talks about enemy, or in Proverbs, enemy, can interpret that as Satan. But I think it's kind of interesting that he considers he later on. I don't think we actually have that verse in there, but do I not, like it says, do I not hate those who hate you? Do I not loathe those? So it's like it's not his enemy. Like who are our enemies? It's usually the ones who sort of don't like us, or not, been against us. But it's like, no, it's actually whoever is against God, that's my enemy. And that's what happens when we walk with God and we fall in love with God that way. And yeah, Satan being the chief enemy of all that we can really battle against, right? So,
yeah.
all right,
Okay, amen.
all right.
Have a nice day.
Have a nice day. Bye bye.